This is my third posting on YouTube about demand curve strategies, and this time I want to show how you use demand curve strategies in choice segmentation. When it comes to brand segmentation, there really are, to my mind, two types of segmentation. The one is based on perceptions. You ask people to associate attributes with different brands, and you compile a perceptual map using correspondence analysis, a statistical technique, to represent the way that people perceive the market. But now I'm introducing another type of segmentation, which is consumer choice between brands based on trade-off, based on the demand curve, and to be fair, one could call it behavioural segmentation as well as choice segmentation. I've never done work in the beer market, but let me produce what I would call a naive perceptual segmentation to demonstrate the first type of segmentation. You take the brands and you end up with, say, Castle Lager being put in a separate corner. Windhoek Lager, well, that's very similar, I think, to Castle Lager. At least they're both lagers. I would say Hansa Pilsner, that's different, which means I'm creating a little axis differentiating between lagers and pilsners. I would put Amstel Lager up there with the lagers. I'd put Lion Lager not inside the same segment. I don't see it as being, I think it's got a different user image. And Carding Black Label, even more of a different user image, being the working man's brand. I would put Windhoek Light in a separate segment, which I differentiate by the differences between normal and light beer. And obviously Castle Light would be going down there. I put Peroni, well, it's probably a light beer because it's an Italian type beer, but it's not quite inside even the beer market to my mind. And that brings me to Heineken. Heineken is my standard brand. I would put Heineken up there with the lagers. But at least it's got lager on the label, so yes, I know it's a lager. That'll be my segmentation. And when it comes to my choices, I would choose between Heineken and Castle. So it is not only a perceptual map, but it does represent my choices. In my first YouTube, I showed how we derive the demand curve for Heineken, in this case. And what you'll see is at price level 1, a certain percentage would prefer to buy Heineken. If we increase the price of Heineken up by 5 Rand from 50 Rand, quite a few of those people will go to another brand and the loyalty decreases. We then increase the price by 10 Rand, which is level 3, and again, our loyalty suddenly drops. For this example, it works better if I work with the basic data rather than showing you graphs. We did a sample, 90 respondents, and we calculated the demand curves based on the trade-off analysis. In column 1, you see the situation when all brands sell at the same price. In this case, 50 Rand per carry pack. Heineken would be bought by 38% of the respondents. And then in column 2, you increase the price for Heineken by 5 Rand, and we leave the others at 50, ask people which one they would prefer, and they would choose, 24% would choose Heineken, which in fact is a drop of 14%, and then we increase the price to level 3. Now look at what happened when the price of Heineken went up by 5 Rand. People, when everything was at par, 20% chose Castle Light. Suddenly, when Heineken is 5 Rand more expensive, 30% would prefer Castle Light. And we do that again. And you'll see Heineken's demand curve dropped from 38% of the respondents down to 17%. So there's a big drop in demand. The loyalty is now down to only 17%. Here we just calculate what the gains and losses are. Heineken, within 2 price increases, would lose 21 of the 38% it had, and of that 12 will go to Castle Light, which is now up to a 32%. Here I'm just reverting to the graphics. See the purple line is the Heineken's demand curve we showed you earlier. The other curves show what happens to the other brands when the price of Heineken is increased, and of course its loyalty is dropping. You will see that the big effect is Castle Light. The other brands really don't have much of an effect or benefit from Castle increasing its price. You will remember from my naive perceptual map that I saw Heineken and Castle Lager as being the brands that are competitive. In fact, what we see here is when Heineken is put under pressure, then the users go to Castle Light. Only 4 of the 21% will go to Castle Lager. My little model is not all that good when it comes to choice behavior as opposed to perceptions. Well, let's see what happens with the demand curve when we test it the other way. If we take Castle Light and we produce its demand curve, you will see as the price increase, it loses from 20%, it loses 11. And where do they go? Well, they go to Heineken. They do not go to Windhoek Light, which is the other light beer in this example. The interaction happens between Castle Light and Heineken much rather than Windhoek Light. Well, there's a problem with my perceptual segmentation if I treat it as being a map of interbrand competitiveness, in other words, of choice behavior. Heineken and Windhoek Light, which should be diametrically opposed, are not. In fact, it would appear from the analysis so far that Heineken is down there and the other lagers are up there. However, before we accept the previous segmentation, let's just have a look at Castle Lager. Let's go and check my perceptual segmentation again. We take Castle Lager, we put pressure on the Castle Lager buyers, or people that claim they would buy a Castle Lager, increase its price by 5 Rand and then again by another 5 Rand, and you see that it quickly loses 8 out of the 12% respondents that it had. Where do they go? Well, they come to Heineken, exactly as I predicted. So my model is more right than wrong. Okay, if we now look at the segmentation, it doesn't really work when we put Heineken in the light segment because, well, it makes sense. The Heineken users comes to Windhoek Light and the Windhoek Light users will come to Heineken. That's where the switching happens. But now we've seen that Castle Lager will also come to Heineken. It does make sense, however, if we put Heineken up there and we put Castle Lager up there in the Castle Light, up there in the lager segment, not in the light segment. Then what the behavioural segmentation shows us, that choices would happen exactly as predicted by this segmentation. Well, I must admit that I was disappointed that after 40 years of being a beer drinker, and maybe as many as producing perceptual maps for marketers, I could be that wrong. I did a bit of a literature search and I found in News 24 this article at 2012. Now, bearing in mind this is 5 years ago, and that is a good thing because it takes a while for marketing strategies to work its way through. He reported that a couple of years ago, seasoned beer drinkers might have looked at you askance if you ordered a Castle Light. So, yes, seasoned beer drinkers would have had my perceptual map a couple of years ago. Today, Castle Light is one of South African breweries' most popular. Castle Light is the biggest, the fastest growing premium brand in South Africa, and sales have grown cumulatively over the past 3 years. But here is the kicker. Although Castle Light is not a true light beer, it contains 4% alcohol compared with 3%. Of course, lagers contain 5%. It does have a low calorie count. So, SA Breweries to Castle Light made a not quite true light beer and actually positioned it into the lager category where it is working. And if you look at the advertising campaigns of Castle Light and Heineken, you will see that they very neatly took the Castle Light and used the Uber hipster to simulate the Heineken Uber hipster, but in a much more South African environment. What really makes this very, very impressive to me is that I started off with a perceptual map, as it would have been produced by correspondence, and interestingly enough, while I used my own perceptions, you would have seen that it was quite driven by the labels, whether the label had a lager on it, whether it had a pilsner on it, or whether it said that it was a light. And then I differentiated two brands very strongly on the user image. I would guess that is still a valid perceptual segmentation. However, when it comes down to consumer choice, it is not what is happening out there. There's different segmentation as far as consumer choices are concerned. Now, that would not be a problem if you did not treat the perceptual map as a representation of how people choose between brands. Mostly the way that perceptual maps are interpreted is that people see these brands as being similar, and therefore they choose between these brands. Now, I did this with 90 respondents in an online survey, and what I did afterwards was actually verify in the news reports that the way that SA Breweries sees this market is more similar to my consumer choice model than to the perceptual map that I derived. I really suggest that if you're working with a map or segmentation, which is based on perceptions, just verify that, do a demand curve segmentation. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope you've learned something new. I certainly learned something from this little study so far.